The municipal courthouse in Oak Ridge smelled of cheap industrial floor wax and that specific, suffocating silence that exists in rooms where lives are dismantled without consent. It was a Tuesday morning in late May. I sat at the defendant's table, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit I had bought specifically for this occasion. It was a garment chosen to give me the polished appearance of a professional, rather than a father who had been discarded like trash by his own flesh and blood. Across from me sat my son Silas and his wife, Beatrice. Silas wore a designer watch, likely bought with the very money he had siphoned from my accounts. Beatrice was busy on her phone, acting as if this trial were a social event rather than a legal execution. They had filed a petition for civil incapacity, claiming I was mentally unfit and that I was fraudulently withholding family assets. Arthur Sterling is a danger to himself and the estate, Silas declared under oath, his voice projecting a practiced, theatrical heartbreak. He has always been controlling. As his mind began to fail, he started hiding family business assets. We are only seeking to protect him. I remained silent. I looked into Silas's eyes. There wasn't a single spark of shame in them. He chose to forget how he and Beatrice had left me locked in a freezing warehouse last winter, hoping I would accidentally perish in the cold. They thought I was a broken old man who didn't understand the system. They didn't realize that when a father's trust is shattered, he doesn't just seek justice. He becomes the architect of ruin. I kept my gaze locked on Judge Evelyn Thorne. Her face was carved from granite, giving no indication of her thoughts. Silas was smirking, convinced he had already won the inheritance. He had no idea that for the past year I had been weaving a trap where every single knot was tied by his own greed. The game was just beginning. When Silas finished his performance, Judge Evelyn Thorne looked toward me. Her eyes were sharp, like a hawk watching for movement in the brush. The air in the room felt heavy, as if the weight of the lies had physically thickened it. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, her voice echoing off the high oak ceilings, "your son has presented a serious case. He claims you have hidden over $10 million in business assets. Do you have a response?" I stood up slowly. I didn't reach for a tissue or pretend to be heartbroken. I adjusted my charcoal suit and looked directly at the bench. "Your Honor, I do not wish to plead or argue. I only wish to present the facts that my son has conveniently ignored." I signaled my attorney, who handed a thick manila envelope to the bailiff. "For the last 18 months, I continued, my voice steady and clinical, the world has believed that Arthur Sterling was losing his mind. But I was not losing my mind. I was busy mapping a network. I gestured to the wall monitor. A complex digital ledger appeared. It wasn't the official business books, but a hidden record, the gray ledger. I watched the color drain from Silas's face. Beatrice's hands began to shake so violently she dropped her gold-plated phone onto the floor. "Silas claims I stole from the family," I said, turning to look at my son. "The truth is, Silas and Beatrice have been executing ghost transfers for 2 years. They didn't just want the inheritance. They were already spending it while I was still breathing." I hit a button on my remote, and the screen shifted from numbers to a video. It was a feed from the hacked security cameras in their own penthouse. The room went silent as Silas's own voice filled the courthouse, laughing about how easy it was to forge my signature, and how they just needed the old man to freeze to death so they could finalize the deeds. The architect of ruin had arrived, and the house of cards was starting to shake. "The video you are seeing is not a deepfake, and it is not a hallucination," I said, my voice cutting through the panicked whispers of the gallery. I watched Silas bury his face in his hands, while Beatrice stared at the screen in frozen horror. "I didn't call the authorities when I first discovered the theft," I continued, pacing slowly in front of the judge's bench. I wanted to see how far the rot had spread. I spent 6 months living in a nondescript apartment, watching through the digital eyes I had placed in my own home. I watched them toast to my impending funeral. I watched them plan how to sell off the family legacy to cover their own gambling debts. I turned back to the monitor, which now displayed a series of unauthorized wire transfers. While they were busy celebrating their victory, I began the bleed. I didn't crash their accounts, I eroded them. I altered the algorithms of the high-frequency trading bots Silas thought were his golden ticket. A fraction of a percent here, a delayed execution there. To them, it looked like a string of bad luck. To me, it was a surgical extraction of every dollar they had stolen. Beatrice suddenly stood up, her voice screeching through the room. He's a liar. He's bitter because we wanted him to have proper medical care. He's attacking his own children. Judge Thorne slammed her gavel down with a sound like a gunshot. Sit down, Mrs. Sterling, or you will be removed. Mr. Sterling, continue. I looked at Beatrice, then at Silas. The money you thought you were fighting for today? It isn't in the estate. It isn't in the business. Over the last 90 days, I have redirected every stolen cent into a trust for the very employees you fired to save on costs. You walked into this courtroom expecting to walk out with millions. You're about to walk out with a negative balance and a federal investigation. But I wasn't just following the money, I said, my voice dropping an octave as I stepped closer to the defense table. I was following the ghosts. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an old, charred silver locket, the only thing I had managed to save from the fire that nearly took my life 15 years ago. Silas, you told the insurance investigators that the warehouse fire was an electrical accident, I continued, holding the locket up so the light caught its blackened surface. You told me you tried to get to me, but the flames were too high. You even accepted a hero's commendation for pulling me out, though I was already crawling through the soot on my own. I clicked the remote again. The screen didn't show numbers or security footage this time. It showed a decades-old police report from a small precinct 3 counties away. A report that had been buried under layers of paid-off favors and bureaucratic dust. Before you were a business mogul, Silas, you were a desperate gambler with a massive debt to the wrong people, I explained, watching his eyes widen. This report contains the statement of a night watchman who saw a young man matching your description entering the warehouse with a gas can 20 minutes before the first. Explosion. You didn't just leave me to freeze last winter, you tried to turn me into ash long before that. Beatrice let out a sharp, jagged breath. That's ancient history. You can't bring that up here. This is about the estate. It is about character, Judge Thorne countered, her voice like cold steel. And it is about the motive behind this very petition. I looked back at the monitor. I spent 12 months digitizing every scrap of evidence from that night. I found the bank records of the anonymous's payout you made to that watchman 2 days after the insurance check cleared. You built your entire life on the lie that you were a savior. Today, we look at the reality of the arsonist. I arranged for the arrest to be delayed just long enough for this final meeting, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air like a blade. I wanted you to understand the weight of the silence you tried to force upon me. I stepped directly in front of the plaintiff's table, looking down at the man who shared my blood, but none of my soul. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, cracked digital device. This was the recording device I had on me the night you left me in that warehouse. You thought I was senile, Silas. You thought I was talking to myself. I wasn't. I was documenting the exact moment you told Beatrice that the old man didn't have much time left and that the cold would do the work the fire couldn't finish. The courtroom monitor flickered one last time. It didn't show a video, it showed a live GPS map of every offshore account Silas had ever used. At exactly 9 o'clock this morning, when this hearing began, I executed a final command. I didn't just drain your accounts to repay the people you cheated. I released the encryption keys to every regulatory agency in this country. Silas let out a strangled, animalistic sound, his hands clawing at the polished oak of the table. You destroyed it. You destroyed everything I built. No, Silas, I replied with terrifying, absolute calm. You built a house on top of a grave, and today the ground finally gave way. I am not the one who destroyed your life. I am simply the one who turned on the lights so everyone could see the ruins. Judge Thorne looked at the documents, then at the monitor, and finally at the cowering man in the designer suit. There was no mercy in her eyes. Mr. Sterling, I said, leaning down so my face was inches from his, you told the court you wanted to protect the estate. Well, the estate is gone. The business is being liquidated, and your freedom is currently being measured in minutes. The doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. 2 federal marshals stepped inside, their presence ending the theater of the last hour. Beatrice began to wail, a high-pitched, thin sound that echoed the emptiness of her own greed. Silas didn't move. He looked at me, and for the first time in his life, he saw the man he had tried and failed to kill. He saw the architect, and he realized he was standing in the center of the demolition zone. The marshals moved with cold efficiency, placing Silas and Beatrice in handcuffs. The metallic click of the restraints sounded like the final period at the end of a long, dark sentence. As they were led toward the side exit, the reality of their situation finally broke through the layers of their arrogance. The designer clothes and the gold-plated phones couldn't save them from the federal charges waiting outside those doors. Wait. Please, Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking as she struggled against the marshal's grip. She turned toward me, her face smeared with tears and ruined makeup. Arthur, please. We were greedy, we were stupid, but we are your family. Don't let them take us like this. We'll give it all back, everything. Just have mercy. Silas, his face pale and eyes wide with terror, fell to his knees before he could be pulled away. Dad, I'm sorry, he sobbed, the voice of the ruthless businessman replaced by the trembling tone of a boy who had finally realized the world didn't revolve around him. I was wrong about the fire, about the warehouse, about everything. Please, Dad, don't let me go to prison. I'm your son. I'm your only son. The courtroom went still. I looked down at them, 2 people who had spent years trying to erase me from existence, and for a moment the fire of revenge in my heart flickered and died. I walked slowly toward them and signaled the marshals to wait. I looked Silas in the eye, not with anger, but with a profound, quiet sadness. I forgive you, I said softly, the words hanging heavy in the air. I forgive the fire, the cold, and the theft, not because what you did was acceptable, but because carrying the weight of hatred for my own child is a burden I no longer wish to bear. I reached out and placed a hand on Silas's shoulder one last time. But forgiveness is not the same as an escape from justice. You must answer for your crimes to the world, just as you have answered for them to me. True peace doesn't come from getting away with a lie. It comes from finally facing the truth. I stepped back as the marshals led them away. As the heavy doors closed behind them, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in decades. I had reclaimed my legacy and taught them the hardest lesson of all, that mercy is the greatest power of the strong, but accountability is the only cure for the wicked. I walked out of the courthouse and into the afternoon sun, a free man in every sense of the word.